So can you go end of your Word document? So don't copy paste and write my Word document. So you have to understand what I'm discussing. That's what I need. That's the only thing I need. All right. Okay. So then I'm moving on to the Word document. Like your tute. Right. I'll open it. So now you can understand what we have discussed, right, in the tube. Right. So please read this one. Then I will explain the same thing I have explained. So in this tube, then now you can understand. Right. So let's look at this standard. The objective of this SLFRS 13 is to provide a single source of guidance for the fair value measurement where it is required by reporting standard rather than it's been spread through several reporting standards, right? So that we have discussed, right? So what is the requirement of this SLFRS 13? It provide a single source of guidance for the fair value measurement where it is required by reporting standards, right? The reporting standards වලින් requirement එකක් තියෙනවනේ fair value measurement එකට. ඒතකොට fair value measurement එක කොහොමද කරන්නේ කියලා එක single guideline එකක් දෙන්න තමයි මේ SLFRS 13 standard එක ඇවිල්ලා තියෙන්නේ, right? Right. Many accounting standards required or allow item to measure at fair value. Some examples: SLFRS LKS 16, SLFRS 3, right? And under the SLFRS 13, it does not apply for the share-based payment, SLFRS 2. Right, you can remember when it's come to the LKS2, we are using the selling price, right, after deducting the realizable value, and value being used when it's come to LKS 16, impairment of assets. So for these standards, SLFRS 13 is not applicable, right? Then when it comes to fair value measurement, right, as we discussed the measurement date, right, we are using the measurement at the upon the initial recognition, right? We are basically examples are SLFRS 13 business combination. We are using the goodwill, right, at the initial date, right? For the goodwill measurement, we are using SLFRS 3. At the initial date, we are using the fair valuation. And when it comes to recurring basis, right, we are using LKS 40 investment property and SLFRS 9, the fair value through P&L in the recurring basis for the fair value, right? And on a non-recurring basis, that means one-off basis, we have discussed the SLFRS 5, like those kind of standards we are using for the fair valuation, right? Right. So therefore, as these indicated by the above range of SLFRs required that assets and liabilities are measured at fair value at a different times. So I'm going a bit fast because I have discussed these things, right, in detailed way, right? So the reason for the issue of SLFRS 13, if someone is asked why we are using the SLFRS 13, to standardize the definition of the fair value, to help the users by providing additional disclosures relating to how fair value has been determined, and to improve the consistency of reported information, right? Right. So that those are the reason why we need to have the SLFRS 13, right? Then the fair value definition: the price that would be received to sell an asset or paid to the transfer of liability in an orderly transaction between market participant at the measurement date that we have discussed, right? So therefore, we have highlighted the important points: the price, right? Orderly transaction, market participant, and the measurement date we have discussed, right? Then the following factors should take into consideration when measuring the fair value, right? So please read this one. So let's have a kind of a 5 minutes break, right? Right. So read this one and let's have a 5 minutes break. So then I will join it with you after 5 minutes, right? Let's start again at 7:55, right? Let's have 5 minutes break, okay? Right. Sorry for the late. Deciding the fair value, take into the consideration the asset liable to be measured may be individual assets, right? Like plot of lands, liabilities, right? And the measurement should be reflect the price at the which the ordinary transaction, right? Ordinary transaction given a price when known, and the market participant should be right. So when you are looking at the valuation, you need to reflect the characteristics of assets, liability, age, condition, to use on decision on useful state, right? We have discussed. Then the determine the when you determine the market, one is the advantageous market, right? Principal market is market which is most number of transactions, right? If the principal have the most මුලින්ම අපි යන්න ඕන principal market එක.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Okay, sorry. I think there's a connection issue. Right. මේ මොකද කියන්නේ? දැන් අපි fair value එක measure කරද්දී, right? So when you are measuring the fair value, right? Right. It says we can't include transaction cost, right? We can't include the transaction cost. For example, according to SLFRS 9, when you are discussing about the fair value through profit and loss, I know you don't know about the IFRS 9, right? But let's assume that you know. So under the SLFRS 9, we will discuss the SLFRS 9 in the later discussions, right? So according to SLFRS 9, when you are deciding the fair value through P&L, right? Fair value through P&L, we are using the transaction price, transaction cost under the P&L, right? Under the P&L, right? So likewise, when you are measuring the fair value, right? When you are measuring the fair value, we are not considering the transaction cost, right? We are not considering the transaction cost, right? We are not considering the transaction cost when you are measuring the fair value. We are not going to consider, right? But when you are measuring the fair value, we are considering the transportation cost, right? Right. Remember, when you are measuring the fair value, we are not going to include the transaction cost, right? But we are including the transportation cost. Why we are including the transportation cost? Because transportation is a characteristics for the fair value, right? We have learned the location, right? දැන් හිතන්නකෝ පදිය තලා ඉන්න කඩව තියෙන fair value එකේ වෙනසක් තියෙන්නේ location එක නිසා. So transportation cost is matter. So transportation cost is one of the factor that affect into the fair value. So they are calculating value. We have to take the transportation cost, but we are not going to take the transaction cost, because if you are taking the transaction cost, it will double count to the fair value, right? Then it will increase the fair value. So therefore, we are not going to take the transaction cost when you are calculating or measuring the fair value. But remember, if the principal market is not available to measure the fair value, so we have to go to the most advantageous market. If the fair value, if the principal market is not available, we have to go to the most advantageous market. So when we are looking at the most advantageous market, we have to consider the transaction cost, not to calculate the fair value, but to measure, but to take the most advantageous market, we have to take the transaction cost, right? Remember this, right? Make a patala ganna lamai, right? Fair value measurement edi කියන්නේ fair value අපි ගණනය කරද්දී transaction cost එක අපි ගණන් ගන්නෙ නැහැ, right? We are not going to take it, but we are taking the transportation cost when you are measuring the fair value, right? That is the first one. Then let's say if you don't have a principal market, අපි හිතමු යම්කිසි භාණ්ඩයක් ගන්න යද්දී ඒ භාණ්ඩයට අදාළව principal market එකක් නැහැ. ඒ කියන්නේ ගොඩක් වෙලාවට transaction වෙන්නේ නැහැ ඒ භාණ්ඩය, right? ඒ නිසා අපිට සිද්ධ වෙනවා අපිට වඩාත් වාසිදායක market එකට යන්න. So when you are deciding the most advantageous market, right, to calculate the fair value, take transaction cost, right? You have to take the transaction cost. Is it clear? Is it clear? Make exam එකේදී test කරනවා සහ ගොඩක් කට්ටිය වරද්ද ගන්න. Right? Is this clear? Is this clear? Yes, guys? ළමයි මේක පැහැදිලිද? Yes. Okay, one more time in a simple way. Okay. Right. So now we are going to measure the fair value. Right? So we are going to measure the fair value. Right? අපි fair value ගණනය කරන්න යන්නේ. So when you are going to measure the fair value, if there is a transaction cost, we are not going to take it to the consideration. Right? Right? We are not going to take it to the consideration. But we are considering the transportation cost, because transportation cost is one of the characteristics that decide the fair value. Right? But let's say when you are going to calculate the fair value, or when you are going to measure the fair value, right? When you are going to measure the fair value, right? We have to use principal market, right? If the principal market is not available, so we have to find out the most advantageous market. මට වඩාත් වාසිදායක market එක හොයාගන්න ඕනේ. So in that situation, when you are finding out the situation 2, when you are finding out most advantageous market, you have to take both transaction cost and transportation cost, right? Transportation cost, right? I hope it's clear. Yes, is it clear? Right. So let's look at this example, then you can identify what I have discussed with you, right? Question number 1, determine the fair value based on market. An asset is sold in 2 different active markets at the different prices. An entity is enters into a transaction in both markets and can access the price in those markets for the asset at the measurement date as follows. So there is a market A, which is Asian market, and market 2 is USA, which is now kind of a dangerous market in the world, right? So the sales volume of the market 1 is 10,000 units per year, where the market 2 is 5,000 units for 5,000 units. So requirement. So you have to find out what is the principal market. So what is the principal market here? What is the principal market? So when you are going to fair value that asset, first of all, you have to find out the principal market, because you have to go to the market to find out the price. So you have to find out the principal market. What is the principal market here? What do you mean by the principal market? Yes, anyone knows? මොකද්ද පුතා principal market එක කියන්නේ? For a particular asset, if the most number of transaction happen or most number of sales volume are there, so then that we call it as the principal market. So here the most number of sales happen in the market 1. So therefore your principal market is what? the market one, right? Market one. Principal market is market one, right? Right. Then what is the fair value of the asset if the market A is the principal market for the asset? So here the principal market is market one because highest number of sales volume is happening, right? So then we have to calculate what is the fair value of this asset. So how we are going to only considering the transportation cost. We are not going to consider the transaction cost, right? So therefore, from 26,000, you have to deduct 2,000, right? So your fair value in the principal market is 24,000, right? Right. So it's market. So then when I going to calculate the fair value, right? You have to only take the transportation cost, not the transaction. Going to cost will be fair value. So fair value of that asset is 24,000. Clear? Is it clear? Is it clear? Right. So then the other situation, let's say there is a no principal market. Let's assume that the market A also having 10,000 and market 2 is also having 10,000 units. So now both the market is having a equal sales volume. So now we can't find out the principal market. The principal market is absent here, right? The principal market is absent here, right? The principal market is absent because both, let's assume market A also having a 10,000 units and the market 2 is also having a 10,000 units. So both the market is having the equal volume. So therefore there is a no principal market. So once you don't have a principal market, so you have to move into the most advantageous market. Most advantageous market. So therefore you have to find out most advantageous market. So what is the most advantageous market here? Yes, what is the most advantageous market here? Yes, what is the most advantageous market? Yes, guys, what is the most advantageous market? Yes, what is the most advantageous market here? M1, no, M2. M1, it is wrong. Why? So, as you remember, right, when we are measuring the fair value, we are not going to take the transaction cost. But when you are looking at the most advantageous market in the situation where the principal market is absent, into consideration the transaction cost, right? So when you are choosing, what is happening? When we are choosing most advantageous market, we have to into consideration. So there are market 2, right? Is the most advantageous market. So then you have to measure the fair value, right? So market 2 is the most advantageous market. So then you have to measure the fair value, right? So 25,000 is from this 25,000 you have to deduct only the transportation is 2,000, right? So then the fair value of that is coming up 23,000, right? 23,000, right? So once you are having a principal market of 24,000, is there principal market is not there absent. So we have to go to the wages market, right? So to get the most advantageous market, you have to deduct both the transaction cost and the transportation cost. So then the most advantageous market is the market two, right? Market two, this, right? So then after finding out the most advantageous market as market two, then you have to calculate the fair value. Once you are calculating the fair value, remember you are not going to consider the transaction cost, only the transportation cost we are considering. So therefore, we are only deducting the transportation cost, 2,000. So the final balance of the fair valuation is coming as 23,000, right? 23,000, right? Clear? Is it clear? Yes, guys, is it clear? So this can be tested in your examination. Is it clear? You have to answer. Is it clear or not? So if you guys are not answering, I will stop the session. Okay, so can you explain it again, please? Okay, like this, right? මම සිංහලෙන් කියන්නම්කෝ. දැන් අපි fair value measurement එක කරන්න යන්නේ. එතකොට fair value measurement එක කරන්න යද්දී, right? fair value එක මනින්න යද්දී මතක තියාගන්න අපි transaction cost එක ගන්නෙ නැහැ. fair value කියලා අගේ ගන්න යද්දී අපි transaction cost එක ගන්න transportation cost එක විතරයි ගන්න. හරි අපිට principal market එකක් නැත්නම් fair value measure කරන්න. ඒ කියන්නේ highest volume of transaction සිද්ධ වෙන market එකක් නැත්නම් අපිට fair value එක ගන්න කරන්න අපිට හොයාගන්න වෙනවා අපිට වඩාත් වාසිදායක market එක මොකක්ද කියලා. මේ වඩාත් වාසිදායක market එක හොයන්න යද්දි මතක තියාගන්න වඩාත් වාසිදායක market එක හොයන්න යද්දි මතක තියාගන්න අපි transaction cost එකයි transportation cost එකයි දෙකම consider කරනවා. ඊට පස්සේ වඩාත් වාසිදායක market එක හොයාගත්තට පස්සේ ඒ මාකට් එක ඇතුලේ fair value එක ගණනය කරද්දි මතක තියාගන්න අපි transaction cost එක consider කරන්නේ නැහැ. Right? Transaction cost එක consider කරන්නේ නැහැ. Right? I hope now it's clear. Right? Is it clear? Now it's clear, right? Those who have not clear. Dayanand, is it clear? Or is it right? Okay. Right. Now we are coming to the next discussion. So let me share examination. There will be definitely a question from IFRS 13. So those who are not participating in the live session, I don't know what will happen. So somewhere there you have to cover, right? Right. Right. Now I'm moving on to the fair value hierarchy. Right. Fair value hierarchy. Right. So what do you mean by fair value hierarchy? You can see levels තුනකට කඩලා තියෙනවා. මොකක්ද මේකෙන් අදහස් කරන්නේ?
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
I think university also having some issues with the internet, right? Even I'm in the university, so there are some failures are happening, right? So what do you mean by these levels? මොනවද පුතා මේ levels වලින් කියන්නේ? මොකද්ද මේ ත්‍රිකෝණය කියන්නේ? So there is a kind of a meaning for this triangle, triangle hierarchy. So you can see when it's come to top of this triangle, it's smaller than the other two. So, right. So that means at the top we are only need to have some few disclosures. But when you are going down, we need to have some more disclosures. So through the fair value hierarchy, what we are discussing the input for calculate the fair value. Input for calculate the fair value. Right. So under the level 1, right? Level 1, we are having the observable data. Observable data. Right? In active market, in identical assets. Identical assets. Right? Observable data, right? So when you are measuring the fair value, you can use the observable data, right? So IFRS 13 or the SLFRS 13 suggests that it is good to use the level 1 data to calculate the fair value, right? Right. What are the observable data? For example, let's say you're going to calculate the JK's value. JKH की company के value का fair value के calculate करना है. So how we can calculate? So you can take the share price of JKH, let's say 20 rupees. You can multiply it by number of shares. So you can come up the answer as 200,000. Right. So this is the JKH value. Right. So how we came to that answer? Through the observable data. අපිට පේන data වලින් active market එකේ share ගනුදෙනු වෙනවා, share price එක අපිට පේනවා. So it's a observable data, right? So when you are valuing the fair value, right, according to the SLFRS 13, it says it's better to go for the level 1 data. That means observable identical active market data, right? Right. So if you are using that kind of input to calculate the fair value, you are only required few disclosures about the fair value, right? Because everyone can see this number, right? Everyone can check the accuracy of this number. So therefore, you are only required few disclosures in the financial statement for the fair value measurement, because it is already observable. දකින්න පුළුවන් data තියෙනවා. ඒක දකින්න පුළුවන් දෙයක් තියෙනවා නම් තහවුරු කරගන්න පුළුවන් දෙයක් තියෙනවා නම් අපිට වැඩි disclosures ඕනේ වෙන්නේ නැහැ. Right. But sadly, in Sri Lankan context, we don't have much observable data to calculate the fair value. Right. දැන් ඔයගොල්ලෝ research check කරන්න ගියාම 40 එකේ දැන් research කරන්න තියෙනවානේ. research කරන්න ගියාම තේරෙනවා. research කරන්න යද්දී ගියාම supervisor හැමලෙම කියනවා මේකට data තියෙනවද කියලා බලන්න. Right? Because in the Sri Lankan context, we don't have data. That's why we are failed. We are working as a failed country, because we can't take decisions because we don't have data. So without data, we can't take decisions. No? Right? අපේ data නැතුව decisions ගන්න පුළුවන්. මට කියන්න පුළුවන් ඔයා හොඳ ළමයෙක් කියලා. මට කියන්න පුළුවන් ඔයා හොඳ ළමයෙක් කියලා ඔයාට තියෙන ඒ ගාන දිහා බලලා. ඔයා ඉගෙන ගන්න ළමයෙක් කියලා. So I said that using my data. Right? Without data, I can't see. මම මූණ බලලා කියනවා මෙයාගේ මූණ දැක්කම ග්‍රහයෝගයේ පිහිටලා තියෙන විදිහට නම් මෙයා පොඩ්ඩක් මීටරයක් වගේ පේනවා. right? මෙයාගේ සෙනසුරු තියෙන්නේ 7 කුජ තියෙන්නේ 8. right? right? මම දන්නේ මම බොරුවට කිව්වා හරි. මේ එහෙම තියෙන කට්ටිය විහිළුවන් මම නිකන් හිතලා නෙමෙයි කිව්වේ. කටට ආපුවක් කිව්වා. කාටට එහෙම තියෙනවනේ එහෙම හිතන්න එපා. හරි? කියලා එහෙම කියන්න පුළුවන්. We need data. right? එහෙම කියන්න මට data ඕන වෙනවා. right? right? So if there is observable data according to SLFRS 13, it says it's better to have the observable data when you are calculating the fair value. Right. Right. Then next one is level 2. it's also observable data, but active or inactive market. Active or inactive market. And also you can use identical or similar. Right? Similar assets. Observable data, inactive or active market. Active market එක හරි inactive. දැන් ලංකාව ගත්තොත් මේකට හොඳ උදාහරණ තමයි debenture market. Right? There are observable data, but market is not active. Right? The transaction is not happening in the debenture market. Market is there. The observable data is there, but market is not active. Right? And what is the meaning of identical? What is the difference? Identical is similar again අතර වෙනස මොකක්ද? Identical and similar. What is the difference between this? Identical assets and similar assets. Yes. අනමයි identical asset එකයි similar asset එක අතර වෙනස මොකක්ද? Because what do you mean by identical assets and similar assets? What is the difference between the identical assets and similar assets? මොකද්ද පුතා identical and similar කියන්නේ? අපි කියනවා identical කියන්නේ සර්ව සමයි. Right? Similar කියන්නේ සමානයි. Right? අපි ගත්තොත් එමේ ඉඩම් දෙකක් ගන්නවා. Right? ඉඩම් දෙකක් ගන්නවා. Right? Right? මේ ඉඩම් දෙකම purchase 10යි. එකම තැන පිටලා තියෙනවා. Right? Right? එකම විදියයි. Right? So then we can say it's identical. Identical assets. Right? හැබැයි මේ ඉඩම තියෙනවා මේ ඉඩමේ එක ඉඩමක තියෙනවා පොල් ගස් දෙකක්. ලිඳක් තියෙනවා. So it's not identical but similar. Similar sort of. There are slight changes. Body changes වගේක් තියෙනවා. Right? Body changes වගේක් තියෙනවා. Right? හැබැයි හිතන්නකෝ මේ ඉඩම face කරලා තියෙන්නේ කොළඹ කැන්ටි main road එකට. මේ ඉඩම face කරලා තියෙන්නේ කුණු ඇලකට. Right? So now what will happen? There is a major change is happening. Right? It's not similar. Right? It's not similar. So if it is not similar, we have to go to the third level. So third level is unobservable data. Right? Data නෑ market එක. Unobservable data. Right? Data නෑ. ලංකාවේ ගත්තොත් ගොඩක් companies right use කරන්නේ level 3 data. Right? Right? Unobservable data, we can say entity specific data. ඒ ආයතනයට අදාළ data තමයි use කරන්නේ. Entity specific data. Right? Unobservable data අපිට data නැහැ. Right? fair value calculate කරන්න data නැහැ. එහෙනම් ඒ ව්‍යාපාරයට අදාළ data තමයි අපි use කරන්නේ. ව්‍යාපාරයේ තියෙන ව්‍යාපාරයට අදාළ data විතරයි අපි use කරන්නේ. Right? Entity specific data we are using. Right? Entity specific data we are using. Right? Entity specific data we are using. Right? Entity specific data using. Right? For example, let's say we are using the free cash flow. Right? Free cash flow of something and we are getting the fair value. Right? So when it's come to the level 3, right? Level 3, I will erase this one to get the space. So when it's come to level 3, since we are having unobservable data, there's a valuation techniques to follow. Right? Right? Valuation techniques to follow. The first approach, valuation techniques are there. Few valuation techniques. First is market value. Right? Market valuation. Market valuation. So market valuation is what? How we are getting? Recent selling price. Recent selling price. අපි හිතමු අපිට පෙන්න දෙයට නැහැ. එහෙනම් අපි මොකද කරන්නේ? එක approach එකක් තමයි valuation කරන market approach එක. ඒකෙදි මොකද කරන්නේ? ළඟදී විකුණපු ගාන බලනවා. ගාන බලලා ඒක අපි ගන්නවා fair value එක විදියට. Right? Right? Then the next one is cost approach. Cost approach. Cost approach means what? We are using the replacement cost. Replacement cost. Cost approach. Right? ඒ asset එක හරි liability එක හරි replace කරන්න යන cost එක. Replacement cost. The third approach and most common approach that most of the companies are using, income approach. Income approach. Right? Income approach. Right? Income approach. Right? Right? Income approach. Right? So in the income approach, we are using what? We are using forecast. Forecast. The companies are using forecast, using some interest rate like 10%, 15% for that entity specific interest rate, and doing some free cash flows forecasting. Right? Forecasting. So when you are using this valuation technique like forecasting, you have to show the sensitivity analysis. දැන් අපි 10% use කරා නම් 12% උනොත් මොකද වෙන්නේ? 8% උනොත් මොකද වෙන්නේ කියලා sensitivity analysis එක පෙන්වන්නත් ඕන. Right? Right? So that is why when the level 3 inputs are using for the fair value measurement, you need what? More disclosures in the financial statements. Right? You need more disclosures in the financial statement because you have measured the fair value using the unobservable data. Right? You have measured the fair value using the unobservable data. Right? So therefore, you need more disclosures. Right? You need more disclosures. Right? Is it clear? Is it clear about this fair value hierarchy? Yes. Basically, when it comes to fair value hierarchy, there are 3 levels. Level 1, which is observable active market, identical assets data. Level 2, observable data, inactive market and identical and similar assets. Right? Level 3, there's no active market, there's no identical or similar asset. So all the data are unobservable. Right? So then we have to go with the entity specific data. ආයතනයට අදාළ data ටිකත් එක්ක යන්න වෙනවා. එහෙම වුණාම අපිට disclosures වැඩියෙන් කරන්න වෙනවා. So we have to use some valuation techniques for that. So you can use the market valuation technique. That means you can use the recent selling price as the fair value, or you can use the cost approach. You can use the replacement cost under the cost approach. So the most common and the most popular approach that most of the companies are using under this level 3 valuation techniques is the income approach. Like you can use a profit forecast, right? So once you are using the profit forecast, you have to do the things using some interest rate. So therefore, when you are using the interest rate, you have to show the sensitivity analysis. What will happen if it goes high, and what will happen if it goes down, right? So likewise, you have to do more or show more disclosures when it comes to the level 3 inputs when you are using to calculate the fair value, right? When you are going to calculate the fair value, right? Is it clear? Is it clear, guys? Right, great. Okay, so with that knowledge, let's look at the Qt. දැන් මම Qt එක discuss කරන්න ගියා නම් ඔයගොල්ලන්ට තේරෙන්නේ නැහැ, right? Qt එක තියෙන්නේ standard මේ Qt එක හදලා තියෙන්නේ standard එකේ තියෙනවා හැමෝම copy කරලා. Right? Right. දැන් අහන්න එපා ඇයි Qt එක හදලා තියෙන්නේ standard එක copy කරලා. Right? Standard එක ඉගෙන ගන්න ඕනේ. Right? මම හිතලා standard එක ලියන්න බෑනේ. So I'm just copy and paste from the standard. So this is the same wording in the standards. If you go through with the standard, you can see this one, right? So in order to maximize the verifiability as well as to increase the comparability, SLFRS 13 state that an entity should maximize the use of observable input when determining the fair value, right? එතකොට SLFRS 13 වල කියනවා maximize the verifiability and comparability. ඒගොල්ලෝ suggest කරන්නේ මොකද්ද? observable data use කරන්න කියලා. ඒ කියන්නේ level 1 data use කරන්න කියලා තමයි suggest කරන්නේ. right? හැබැයි sad story එක තමයි ලංකාවේ level 1 data නැති එක. To aid with the application of the above, SLFRS 13 establish a hierarchy that categorize the input to the valuation technique used to measure the fair value, right? So therefore, you can use the level 1 input, right? That means quoted price, that means observable price in an active market for the identical assets, right? Then level 2 inputs, observable input other than those included within the level 1 above, which are observable directly or indirectly, right? Inactive or active, right? And the level 3 input, unobservable input for the asset and liability based upon the best information available, including information that may be reasonably available related to the market participant. That means entity specific data, right? Entity specific data, right? So these are some examples when it comes to level 1, equity share in the listed entity, like as I did for the JKH holding, their share price is 20 and share number of shares is 10,000, then you can get the JKH value as 10,000, right? 100,000, right? JKH share price is, let's say 20, they are having 10,000 shares, so their value is 20,000, 200,000, right? So this is level 1 data, equity shares in a listed market. And level 2, building held and use, price per square meter for the building from observable market data, such as observed transaction for similar building in similar location, right? අර මං කිව්වේ ඉඩම් දෙකක් එක ළඟ තියෙනවා. ඒ ඉඩම් දෙකම purchase 10යි 10යි එක ඉඩම මිලියන 10 න අනිත් ඉඩමත් අපිට කියන්න පුළුවන් මිලියන 10යි කියලා. right? බිල්ඩින් එකක් තියෙනවා. ඒ බිල්ඩින් දෙකම එක ළඟ තියෙන එක වගේම බිල්ඩින් එක බිල්ඩින් එක මිලියන 10 නම් මේ බිල්ඩින් එක මිලියන 10යි. right? right? Identical or similar asset in an active or inactive market observable data. Level 2. Then level 3, cash generating units, profit cash flows forecasting using own data, right? So level 2, you are having, level 3, you are having unobservable data. So you can use a cash flow statement and you can find out the value using your own data, right? Using your own data, right? Right. So we have discussed about the valuation techniques as well, right? Cost approach, the market approach, and the income approach, right? So let's look at this question number 2 and tell me what is the answer. Yes, read this question. Yes. Baklava has an investment property that is measured at fair value. This property is rented out on a short-term lease. The director wishes to fair value the property by estimating the present value of the net cash flows that the property will generate for the Baklava. They argue that this best reflects the way in which the building will generate economic benefit for Baklava. The building is unique, although there have been many sales of similar building in the local area. Right? Discuss whether the valuation technique suggested by the director complies with the international financial reporting standard. Right? දැන් මේ ඉන්වෙස්ට්මන්ට් ප්‍රොපර්ටි එක ෆෙයා වැලියු එකට මෙෂර් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒගොල්ලෝ මෙෂර් කරලා තියෙන්නේ කොහොමද? මෙෂර් කරලා තියෙන මොන ලෙවල් එකෙන්ද? Which is the level? The level of inputs they are using. Is it level 2? Obviously it is not level 1. Right? Is it level 2 or 3? දැන්ට ෆෙයා වැලියු කරලා තියෙන මොන ලෙවල් එකෙන්ද? මොන ලෙවල් එකේ ඉන්පුට් අරගෙන? Yes. What is the level they have used? So yeah, they are using the level 3 data. Right? 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 Because yeah, they are using what? Present value of the net cash flows. Right? They have used the income approach. Right? Then they argue that this best reflects the way in which the building will generate the economic benefits of Balcao. Right? And this building is unique, although there have been many sales of similar building in the local area. So that means what? So you are having the observable data of similar assets. So that means, right? You can go to the what level? You can go to level 2 rather than going for the cash flows by using the company's interest rate and company's data. You can use the level 2 data to measure the fair value, right? To measure the fair value, right? So therefore, the applicable financial reporting policies are wrong here because they are using the level 3 data to value the fair value. But actually, they are having the observable data, which is for the similar assets, right? So therefore, it's better to use the level 2 data to calculate the fair value, right? So likewise, you have to think and answer, right? Is it clear? The answer is clear? Yes? Is it clear, Buddha? Guys, tell me. Nidida? Amaruida? I'm also very tired. So after finishing of your results, not yours, the final years. Right? So these days we are finalizing the final year's results to go for their convocation. So we have to allow them to go for a conversation. So we have to check results. All right. So I think you are a bit. Okay, please explain it again. Okay. Then right? So they have value the asset for the fair valuation. Right? Investment property, they are value for the fair value. So when you are calculating the fair value, they are using the level 3 data. That means they are using the net cash flow of the property. So how we are going to calculate net cash flow? We are using the interest rate of the company or the cost of capital of the company, and we are using the cash flows of the company, and we are calculating the net cash flow. Then we are considering it as a what do you call the fair value, right? According to the level 3 data. Level 3 data means unobservable, right? Market එක පේන්න නැහැ company එකේ data, company specific data. Right? Company specific data use කරලා තමයි fair value කරලා තියෙන්නේ. Right? හැබැයි මේ similar type of assets මේ වගේ එකම වගේ building විකිනෙනවා. Right? Identical නෑ හැබැයි similar asset විකිනෙනවා. එතකොට SLFRS 13 වල කියලා තියෙනවා වඩාත් හොඳයි level 1 data තියෙනවා නම්. එහෙම නැති වුණොත් level 2 data use කරන්න ඕනේ. එහෙමත් නැති වුණොත් විතරයි level 3 data වලට යන්න ඕනේ. හැබැයි level 3 data වලට ඇද්දි disclosures ගොඩක් දාන්නත් ඕනේ. right? එතකොට මේ අවස්ථාවේදී අපිට level 2 data පේනවා. මොකද observable data තියෙනවා similar asset වල. එතකොට ඔයාලට පුළුවන් similar asset එකක් විකුණපු ගාන මගේ fair value එකක් විදිහට ගන්න. Because it can be seen, right? පිට ඉන්න කට්ටියට පේනවා ඒක. මේ වගේ asset එකක් ගොල්ලලා තියෙන මේ ගන්නට. ඒතර fair value එක හරිම realistic. right? The fair value එක realistic වෙන්න ඕනේ. දැන් මේ පෙන්නන number fair value එක හරි number එකක් වෙන්නයි ඕනේ. Right? So that is why this standard is providing the guidelines. Right? Is it clear? So then it should be suggested to go to the level 2 since the level 2 data is available. Right? You can use the level 2 data and you can calculate the fair value for this asset. Right? Clear? Is it clear? Is it clear, guys? Is it clear? All right. So I'm also a bit tired, right? I think you also tired, right? Because you guys are not answering to me. So therefore, I will wind up the session for at this point, right? So next week, the balance part I will cover up. So then after covering up the balance part, only a few parts, actually, we have discussed the cost approach as well. Only the disclosures are there. So I will take only 10 to 15 minutes and I will cover up those things at the beginning of the next lecture, right? So then we will discuss the LKS 41 in next week. So you better to go through with that standard. Then when we are discussing, you are having a clear idea, right? All right. So let's find up the session for today. So if you have any questions, you can ask. I know you don't have any questions, but as a formality, I am asking. Yes, any questions you guys are having? Everything is clear? At least give me a kind of feedback whether this space is okay or anything to improve from my side. It's better to give a feedback. Right? Feedback දුන්න කියලා sir උගන්වන එක මෙලෝ දෙයක් තේරෙන්නේ නැහැ. That's okay. So then I will do something else. Right? මම saving විශ්‍රාම යන්නේ නැහැ. හැබැයි I will do something else to go for that to like to take it to some kind of understandable level. I think everything is clear. All right. So if you don't have any questions, so let's wind up the session. Yes, definitely you have to go through it yourself, right? Because this is a university, not a tuition class, right? Yeah. All right. So, okay, if you don't have questions, so let's wind up the session for today. So thank you very much for engaging. So have a good day. Good night.